It is expected that the AfCFTA will produce more jobs for Africa's bulging youthful population. This is because extractive exports on which Africa's trade is currently based are less labor intensive than the manufactures and agricultural goods that will benefit from the AfCFTA. By promoting more labor intensive trade, the African Continental Free Trade Area creates more employment. However, for the youth to exploit the benefits of the agreement and the free trade area, it is important to emphasize that formal education is critical. Education, as you may well know, is one of the most powerful weapons in the fight against extreme poverty, particularly for girls, who are the hardest affected by poverty. For the successful implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, there is also need for awareness of the agreement and the opportunities that it offers. And it is in that sense that I find this forum very important and timely to ramp up sensitization of the AfCFTA. As the Secretariat, we would collaborate with the member states and private sector operatives to spread awareness through sensitization programs. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we started the year 2020 in great anticipation that the long-awaited African Continental Free Trade Area would eventually become a reality, with trading under the scheme scheduled to begin on July 1, 2020. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the implementation of the agreement had to be moved to 1st of January 2021. With the devastating impact of the pandemic gradually waning and trading under the agreement expected to start early 2021, it is a step in the right direction to examine how the agreement would provide economic opportunities post-COVID-19 to accelerate industrialization within Africa, which is the theme of your summit. And I congratulate you. On this note, I wish you a successful summit and thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kitcha, for those words on behalf of His Excellency, Wamkele Mene. And I do feel quite inspired, you know, in terms of just the words to really encourage us as young people to really take on this mantle of opportunity that the African Continental Free Trade Area presents to us. So thank you to you, and please share our regards to Mr. Mene for his gracious presence. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, to move swiftly along to our next component of the agenda today is a panel. And this panel is basically the first of three today, and it's entitled Growing the Digital Infrastructure in Africa for Effective Implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Beyond COVID-19. Now, obviously, we've been reflecting in the last couple of hours about the need for us to really drive e-commerce solutions, particularly in light of the COVID-19 response and the fact that we needed to adjust to these new conditions. So what does this mean for us going forward? So it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of the panel, Sonia Natalie Mukundane from Uganda. Over to you, Sonia, and please introduce all our guests on that panel. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. You can hear me loud and clear?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Just have to make sure, because I am in Uganda and we're not entirely known for having the best internet connectivity, but we do have awesome tourism and all that. It's an amazing and exciting opportunity to be on this summit. Hello to all of you from different parts of Africa. I hope so far you've enjoyed what you've had. I hope you've learned so much. I hope you've been able to network, because we are in a revolution despite the pandemic. We've been able to have such a summit because we are young people and we cannot let something like COVID-19 stop us from engaging and trying to find out how we can best utilize the opportunity. And the greatest opportunity given to us is the African continent Free Trade Area Agreement. Now, I am honored to be the moderator for panel one, and we have such a distinguished and powerful lineup of speakers. And just to give you a brief background regarding panel one, our topic will be growing the digital infrastructure in Africa for effective implementation of the African Free Trade Area Agreement beyond COVID-19. We have to look beyond COVID-19. And just to give you a brief concept is that digital infrastructure and access to the internet remains out of reach for most people on the continent, especially young people, with only 39.3% having access to the internet, according to the Internet World Statistics. African governments need to invest strategically and systematically in developing digital infrastructure services. So how can we harness this? The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted millions of lives, schools, and life as we know it. Unfortunately, the digital poor infrastructure has hampered business growth, and this has affected young people. So our opening question and what our panelists for today will be able to speak about and educate us on is, it is not in doubt that the digital trade is the next frontier on the continent, given the sheer number of Africa's youth population. We have seen numerous examples across the continent recently. In what ways do our panelists think that Africa's governments can build on the growing tech ecosystem through investment in digital infrastructure to support digital trade and promote continued development of digital solutions to address the continent's challenge? I'll just repeat the question so that we're all on the same page, both the panelists and our distinct attendees. And the question is, in what ways do I think that Africa's governments can build on the growing tech ecosystem through investment in digital infrastructure to support digital trade and promote continued development of digital solutions to address the continent's challenges? So our first panelist will be Mr. Andrew Beard. I'm not sure if I pronounced that wrong. And he is none other than the CEO of Vanu Group. First, going to Mr. Andrew Beard. Then we shall go to Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, the Director of Technology, Climate Change, and Resource Management in UNECA. Then we shall go to our distinguished lady, Ms. Jessica Anuna, the founder of Klesha. And then we shall finally end with none other than Mr. Luke Kizito Muleka, who is with Science Media Limited. So just to make sure, Mr. Andrew, do we have you on call? Okay, All right, so as Mr. Andrew is getting ready, we can go on to our next distinguished panelist, and that's none other than Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, the Director of Technology, Climate Change and Natural Resources Management in UNECA. Mr. Jean-Paul, do we have you on board?
I'm here, thank you, and good afternoon. I'm in Addis Ababa, so it's good afternoon, but good morning and hello to everyone. I hope, first of all, ECA is delighted to be part of this event. And I think in terms of the actions in terms of digital infrastructure that need to be taken, firstly, we must recognize the huge opportunity. I think we must approach this from a perspective of optimism, the opportunity that is there for digital transformations across the continent. Of course, we're faced with a scenario where the connectivity rates are insufficient, and we need to invest dramatically in infrastructure to allow that to happen. But what can give us particularly hope that this is possible? If we look at the mobile revolution that happened in the last decade in Africa, by 2019, more than 80% of the population in Africa had a mobile phone subscription. The economic contribution of the mobile economy linked to the use of mobile phones is forecast to reach 7.6% of the overall African GDP this year in 2020. That's $214 billion. And just to show you that how this is growing, this was only 6.7% of GDP in 2016, and this at that point was only $153 billion worth of the mobile economy. So, and in the last 10 years, the continent has actually also recorded the highest growth in internet access, even though this overall internet access remains low. And that increase was 23.1% over the last 10 years. And to show you as well how far we've come, in 2005, internet access was still only 2.1%, and it's risen to 28.2%. But that is still low compared, it's still the lowest in the world, unfortunately. The opportunities that's there is that if we can create that connectivity across our entire continent, the growth that will be unleashed will be phenomenal. The problem that we have at the moment as well is that investments, and what is perhaps preventing further investments, the internet infrastructure that's already been installed remains expensive to users. And of existing users of internet, only 34% still have access to broadband facilities. It will cost, according to the ITU, around $400 billion to connect Africa digitally. But when we look at the opportunities through the AfCFTA, we can see huge opportunities to increase e-commerce opportunities. We've seen this happen under lockdown, where a number of companies have actually been formed, and there's very much been an embrace of the entrepreneurial spirit, particularly by young people in Africa. And the investment that needs to happen will further be a Kickstarter for economic growth, and it is part as well of this green growth model. If we can use digital infrastructure more effectively, ultimately we can create a growth model which uses less carbon, which creates less emissions, which is more in tune as well with the expectations of consumers, both within Africa and beyond. So the focus of governments has to be the regulatory environment that looks at affordable investments, that de-risks that investment for the private sector, and that these investments can be seen in the long term, because the returns are going to be there, that's for sure. But you have to fast track the investments up front for them to happen. Thank you. Sorry, maybe I was a little bit long, but I think that highlights a few of the key areas that I think we need to focus on going forward.
Thank you so much, Jean-Paul. I love it. You kept time short, precise, straight to the point, and we shall be hearing from you shortly as the attendees ask questions. Just to announce a bit of a revision in the lineup. Next, we shall be having Ms. Jessica Nouha, founder of Clash. After, we'll be having Mr. Cedric Atangana, CEO and co-founder of Wikasha, and Mr. Lukizito Muleka, of founder of Science Media Limited. then Miss Allen Ekeledo, Executive Director of AfriLabs, and then
Sonia? Okay, I think we may have missed Sonia just a little bit from a connectivity perspective. But I think what's important is she was just introducing the rest of our speakers. So it was Anna Ekeledo and Nouha Belaid. Thank you very much. So I think while we're waiting for Sonia's internet connectivity to improve, could I ask Jessica if you could contribute on your piece? Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Are you guys able to see me okay?
Jessica?
Yeah, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah.
You can put it forward, yes. Can you just put on your video?
Yeah, my video is on.
Okay, fantastic.
Not sure that's not showing, but anyway, good morning, everybody. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. So thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to joining the discussion today. So as we know, the AfCFTA agreement promotes the movement of capital, people and goods cross-border across Africa. But, you know, governments at this stage need to understand that digital trade is crucial to give consumers access to distant markets and also for companies to facilitate cross-border trade online. We know that in Africa, we have the fastest growing mobile penetration. Therefore, opportunities for cross-border trade is growing insurmountably. Young companies like mine, Kasha, are leveraging technology to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And other companies in e-commerce, main gateways, can take advantage of this, especially the control of tariffs and the ease of movement across the continent. As we know, currently 53% of Africa's exports currently go to countries, particularly in Europe. So the AfCFTA encourages trade between African countries, and this is something that governments should want to facilitate. You know, as my colleague said earlier, governments need to reduce the cost of data, increase network connectivity, and also that thus will increase e-commerce spending. We saw during COVID, companies like Amazon and Shopify in the West report rapid growth, and their shares went up considerably as well. The infrastructure to move goods easily cross-border across countries and states. The African Development Bank said that Africa was set to grow between 4% and 5% this year, but the impact of COVID has obviously slowed this down, causing some countries to introduce protectionist policies. So for many African countries, most of their trade is still with global trading partners as opposed to intra-Africa trade. And we know that the low levels of intra-Africa trade are because tariff revenue is still an important source for government revenue. So yeah, that's my contribution to the discussion today. Look forward to hearing what my other colleagues have to say and look forward to the Q&A as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jessica. Sonia, do we have you back with us again?
Yes.
Apologies
for that. The internet connection is a bit shaky. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miss Jessica. That was really brief and straight to the point. Attendees, do not forget, if you have any
Sonia, I think we've kind of lost you again. So what I'm going to do is maybe just introduce our next panelist, Mr. Cedric Atangana. Mr. Cedric Atangana is the CEO and co-founder of WeCashUp. So over to you, Mr. Atangana.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, can you hear me? Just to make sure my mic works well.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, excellent, excellent. So thank you so much, everyone, for inviting me here. I'm Cedric Atangana. I'm the CEO and co-founder of WeCashUp, which is a Pan-African payment platform. I'm Cameroonian. My contribution to the topic that we are addressing today is firstly to thank the African Union and all the people who are working on the AfCFTA initiative, because our continent is has 1.3 billion people today, and when we compare it to big markets like China is 1.4 billion people. But the real thing is China has one language, one currency. It's a kind of one everything. It's a unified market. And we've seen companies starting in China becoming unicorns without leaving China, which is a big advantage that they have there, to have a unified market where people can just expand their business and reach more people. But when you come back home to Africa, we have 54 countries. We have 42 central banks, 42 currencies, so 42 local banking regulations. And so it becomes very difficult to trade between African countries. And more than 80% of our population don't use traditional banking services. Today, most of them, the 80% use mostly cash and now mobile money. And our continent has more than 165 local mobile money solutions on the continent, running isolated one from another, with no Pan-African interoperability. So if I'm sitting in Douala today, and I have clients in Nigeria, we share the border with Nigeria, but I want to be able to get payments from a Nigerian customer, which is completely crazy, because we are, sharing the borders. We have, populations who speak the same language in both countries, and they share the same culture and everything. But once you cross the border, you're now unable to get paid. And when you start thinking, okay, I'm in Cameroon, I have clients in Kenya or Senegal or Morocco or South Africa, it becomes like a nightmare. So I want to congratulate the team working on the AfCFTA, because that's I think we are moving to unifying our African market to become like a market like China, where I know a lot of startups on the continent are building amazing solutions that can benefit all our populations everywhere. So, and we have, I would say, 3 big breaks here. Like, first one is like human movements. So it becomes it is still very difficult for me as a Cameroonian to travel to Cote d'Ivoire. So I still need to have a visa. I have to, if I want to go to Ethiopia, I still need a visa, which is completely crazy, because we face the same issues. And maybe I could have a solution that could benefit people in Ethiopia. So that's the first break that these guys are addressing, which is absolutely great. Now we have the movements of our goods. So we are talking about e-commerce. I'll see e-commerce in two ways. We have the e-commerce of products, like physical products. So Jessica was talking about, e-commerce, like clothing and all those things. If I'm in Douala and I want to buy a product from her, and she needs to deliver those products to me in Cameroon, it is still a lot challenging like hell. And this is something that we need to address. Make sure that our governments create bridges so goods can flow easily. And finally, the biggest break that we have today is the financial flow breaks. So many still struggle to move. It's much more easy to move money from Cameroon to France than moving money from Cameroon to Ethiopia. So we need to address, and that's what we are focusing on at WeCashUp. We are building a Pan-African payment infrastructure that aggregates all the existing local payment solutions. So we work with central banks, we work with banks and also mobile operators to make sure that we can create a Pan-African interoperability loop so that money can flow much more easily across the continent. So we can boost e-commerce and make sure that African startups become unicorns sitting in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cedric. Not sure if Sonia is back on the call, but if not, what I will then ask is let's go straight into Luke's thoughts on the question today. So Luke Muleka from Kenya.
Thank you very much. My name is Luke Kizito Muleka. I'm the founder and managing director of Science Media Kenya Limited, a company that propagates social, economic, political, and talent development of persons with disabilities. Currently, we have two products that works around innovation to improve the inclusion of persons with disability. The first one is Science TV, which is a TV station broadcasting in sign language with voice overrides. That means that the deaf people are able to participate in our broadcast on a daily basis. That is from information, entertainment, and everything. Our programming is all, has that inclusion aspect. And we employ most of our presenters on the station are persons with disabilities. So we have persons with albinism, we have blind people, we have deaf people, we have physical disability, and all other disabilities. Then the second product that Science TV was launched in 2017. Then in 2020, in response to COVID, we realized that deaf people will not be able to access proper interpretation services because of, in case an interpreter will be going to an isolation room, they will be dressed in full PPEs. That means their mouth, lips, and the eyes will be dressed, and the hands will also be covered. So we came up with a product called, innovated a product called Assistol. Assistol is a sign language, is a mobile sign language operator's application, in which now an interpreter can be able to be accessed on the in the isolation room without necessarily being in the isolation room. And we've seen that this product is being accepted by very many people. And the good thing is, an interpreter in Kenyan Sign Language will speak to the Kenyans, Cameroonian Sign Language will speak to the Cameroonian, and currently we have interpreters from 6 African countries, including Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and South Africa. So those are the countries that currently we have interpreters, in which now it becomes easy. I want to dive into the topic of today, and this is the African Continental Free Trade Area. And as my colleague Atangan has just said, that you find that the issue of segregating, cutting Africa into very small blocks, that first of all, it becomes very uneconomical to do business, and becomes very uneconomical for anybody even to move. It has actually inhibited the movement of resources in terms of human labor, connectivity of the networks. Now you find that countries that have actually utilized the opportunity that's come with the theory of large numbers, they are overtaking Africa, while as an African continent, we have one solid block that is actually has everything that is favorable. Now, the African governments, just I would say that COVID has accelerated the integration of digital space into our lives, and in which we are encouraging the African governments actually to look into COVID actually as an accelerator, in which you find that now most of the things, most of shopping, trade has actually gone online, in which even if you look at this conference, probably will be seated somewhere in a certain country, all of us are flown in. But now because of the COVID situation has enabled this conference actually to be online, which is actually something that we should take as pride as that has been brought out of the COVID. But now the question that comes in also as the African governments are adopting the digital way is how accessible are our digital platforms. For example, government now will move into offering all its services and information on the web. How is that web designed to access for persons with disabilities to access? That is an area that the African governments should look into. And that's why when Cedric is designing the payment model, should look at how are persons with disabilities, that is all range of disability, including the deaf, including the blind, are they going to access this particular platform. And that means that the concept of leave no one behind is actually something that should be taken by the governments very seriously and look at. For example, during COVID-19, in which I saw in Kenya, where the newspapers were now distributing in a PDF mode. But the blind people are not now able to read these newspapers. Why? Because the format in which they were being sent was not compatible or accessible to the blind person. When we are building now the webs into the future, the websites of our governments, our institutions, and even the corporates into the future, how accessible are these? During COVID in Kenya, I will report that something positive happened in which the government, through the institution that deals with disability, gave a circular to most governments to ensure for as simple as a service charter, because what used to happen is at every reception of the government, there would be a service charter in which a blind person walking in would actually try to read because it's in Braille, and another blind person coming, that means there will be transmission of COVID. But from that, what happened is that all those material were instructed to be digitized, in which now on one platform, we have a blind person enjoying information and a deaf person, because it's now voice and sign language on the same thing. And that can actually be put on the website of the government agencies, in which now it becomes very accessible. So I would say that I'll just stop there and wait and listen to my colleagues' contribution. Then from there, I'll be happy to take some of these Q&A as we go further into the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Luke, for that eloquent presentation. I love the fact that you mentioned a very important group, and that is people with disabilities. How can they also be engaged into the conversation? Because this trade agreement is not just for us, it's also for those who do not have connectivity. Please stay online, and I will be giving you your questions from the audience after the final speaker. Thank you so much for keeping time as well. Apologies for my connectivity. This is part of the conversation we're having. I'm in Uganda. They tax us for internet, but they cannot even give us good enough internet to hold conversations such as this, but we fight on. All right, so our next speaker for the day is none other than the very eloquent Miss Anna Ekeledo, who is the Executive Director of AfriLabs. Madam Anna, are you on the call? Kindly let us see
Yes,
your...
I am.
All right, and we can hear you loud and clear. The floor is yours.
Fantastic.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. Well, to answer the question on what government should be doing to build its infrastructure, I mean, I like the fact that the previous speakers have really elaborated on a very high level, from a very high level perspective on what the government should be doing and what the challenges are. To Cedric's contributions, which were excellent, really talking about the realities that tech startups face. So before I, answer the question, I'll just give a brief background of what I do. I run AfriLabs. AfriLabs is a network organization of technology and innovation hubs across Africa. We have 225 members across 47 African countries, all working to build and support tech startups to build their innovative ideas, build successful businesses that would, create jobs, scale, create wealth on the continent, and innovative solutions across all sectors. Now, this question on what the government should be doing, I would like to reference a very practical recommendation document that was put together by the ecosystem in Nigeria using a very bottom-up approach. And this is the Nigerian technology, the Nigeria ICT Innovation and Entrepreneurship Vision. And how this was developed over the last 2 years is, tech and tech startups came together with innovation hubs and other stakeholders such as corporate organizations, investors, and all of that to talk about the challenges that we face in building tech startups in Nigeria and in the continent generally. And what came out of these, series of discussions and dialogues and policy hackathons and all of that engaging the government is this document that had various pillars, and one of it specifically tackled digital infrastructure. Now, I like the fact that John Paul and Jessica earlier on spoke about the challenge of the high cost of internet connectivity And Luke also mentioned the importance of being inclusive in designing these policies and implementing interventions. Now, a couple of recommendations that came out, to tackle this issue in Nigeria, for example, which is applicable in a lot of African countries, is looking at issues such as the right-of-way charges for fiber distribution across the nation. So in Nigeria, for example, if a telecommunications company wants to lay down fiber cables across a state, they'll literally have to pay each local government within the various district fees. And then of course there are other taxes that would be implemented by state government, and of course there's taxes by the federal government. So there are all these charges and multiple taxation that eventually increases the cost of laying down infrastructure, digital infrastructure, in this case internet infrastructure, which then gets transferred to the consumers. Now when we look at that in a very practical sense, you see consumers having to pay, you see business owners building their businesses and needing to leverage on the internet to scale, having to increase their startup costs as a result of internet facilities that are expensive. You see the consumers that can't consume these tech products, for example, because the cost of internet relative to their the average standard of living is way too high. And then this is why, recommendations that have to do with tackling the problem from the roots, and government creating policies to ensure that all these charges are basically removed or significantly reduced. Another as well is the dig once policy. So under dig once policy, we're looking at a scenario whereby any traditional infrastructure investment, so we're talking about roads, electricity, water, and the likes, should be accompanied by fiber optic cables where one doesn't exist already. So if a government sits and to develop a master plan for a city, either to improve on existing cities or to build new cities, what African governments should be doing right now is seeing broadband connectivity as an essential service. Just like water and electricity is, internet connectivity should be. And this also looks at last mile digital infrastructure. I like the fact that Rwanda as well, as part of its Rwanda master plan, also really took into consideration last mile broadband access and connectivity. So looking at broadband as a utility in itself. So other ways as well is supporting renewable energy, through easily accessible tax incentives for renewable energy. Jean-Paul earlier also mentioned, the need to reduce carbon emissions and the likes in consuming technology and building this digital technology. That's important. And lastly, it's quite important for the government as well to build a national data framework and harmonize e-governance to enable innovation, improve efficiency, transparency, accountability, and citizen participation in government. We should have serious conversations on the African continent about freedom of information, about being able to access social services via digital means as well. But of course, all this can only be facilitated and inclusive, irrespective of your location or physical economic disadvantage as a result of having access to affordable internet connectivity and other forms of digital infrastructure. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Ekeledo. Sonia, can you hear us? I must encourage at least one of our participants here to really think of internet connectivity as something that they should invest their time in. I think it will definitely be a very productive pursuit. Thanks, Anna. I mean, and just reflecting on what you're saying, you know, we have to think about what it means for us to be able to truly drive connectivity on this continent, and just reflecting on your point around the fact that you have to pay so much and you're within one country. Imagine now trying to connect the entire continent. So thank you definitely for that. What I will do now is, if I can just ask our final panelist, but certainly not least, Ms. Nouha Belaid, to please join us in trying to answer this question. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I have the pleasure to be with you today to answer this question and some other questions later. So to answer the first question, and let's talk about the African reality, namely in Maghreb. Whether you want it or not, we do not have an excellent infrastructure that allows the development of digital practices in many countries in Africa, and especially in the Maghreb countries. On the other hand, we have talented people expert in digital for that, which promotes us to think about reducing the flow of these people who find a job opportunity and go abroad. So in this case, governments are called to reduce the immigration of talented people. Then I totally agree with Mr. Anna Ekeledu. So she said that the government have also to reduce the cost of internet and material, as not all African people have access to digital world. So in this case, how we can think to develop e-commerce if citizens are not able to pay for internet, or they are not able to buy a smartphone or laptop to get access to internet, and then to practice to do e-commerce. During the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen all over the world the emergence of some e-commerce initiatives launched by people active in civil society, even in Tunisia. It was the case. So governments are called upon to cooperate with civil society and encourage all good initiatives. And we have seen this kind of cooperation during the crisis of the first wave of the COVID-19 crisis in Tunisia and in some other countries, even in Africa. Finally, cooperation between countries is very important in establishing a cooperative partnership. What I mean by this, some cooperation or some cooperative partnership exists, but are not materialized. That's meaning so we should be reviewed. They should be reviewed after taking into account the changing context. The way of practicing the e-commerce 10 years ago is not the same today, because we start talking about e-commerce since a long time, but today we are talking about a new context with the new digital practices. So today we have a new way of implementation and strategies. That's why some governments should review some law which organize the digital practices, which is the case, for example, in Tunisia. As I'm from Tunisia, that's why I talked many times about Tunisia. You know, in Tunisia, up to date, we have not access to Visa or MasterCard to pay for online activities outside the country, and the government want to manipulate the flow of money exchange. So we are not able, up to date, this time, we are not able to make any transaction without asking the central bank for permission. That's why we have, that's why we have to review some laws, some partnership to be able really to encourage people to do e-commerce. And what's very, very important is to encourage civil society to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Belaid. And just to complete my introductions, my apologies there. Nouha Belaid is the PhD expert in digital practices, and she's the co-founder of the Arab Journalism Observatory. So thank you for that comment. And I think, reflecting on what you're saying around the role of civil society in terms of being able to drive some of the changes that we need in this space, and just challenging our governments on what those limitations look like. I see Sonia's back online. So Sonia, not at all.
All right, thank you so much. At this point, I don't keep up. Now we've had from the very eloquent speakers, despite the technical glitches here and there. Once again, I'm sorry, it's the country that I am in. But now we go on to the most dynamic part of the session, and that is the question and answers. And we're going to start with none other than Mr. Jean-Paul. If I'm to remind the attendees who've just joined us, he is the Director for Technology, Climate Change and Natural Resources at UNECA. And Mr. Jean-Paul, let me just confirm, are you still with us? Kindly switch on your video.
I'm here. My video should be on, so hopefully you can see me.
Yes, I can see you quite clearly. Now, please tell us, Mr. Jean-Paul, according to your opinion, given the challenges and realities faced by African countries, especially with regards to building digital infrastructure, much of which was exposed during the peak of the pandemic. And as a result of this congestion, would you say that the Africa Free Continental Area provides an appropriate platform for negotiating and implementing strategies for incremental investment in Africa's digital infrastructure? What is your opinion? Hit us with it.
Absolutely. I think that the AfCFTA is perhaps one of the biggest enablers to allow the investment that's needed in digital infrastructure, because obviously when you are the majority of African countries, almost half of African countries have populations of less than 10 million. Now, when you are, and plus you also have generally, compared to other regions, perhaps a less purchasing power. So now let's look at the analogy of the investments that happened, the mobile revolution. When telecommunications companies invested in mobile infrastructure, at the start, you had the same problem. You didn't necessarily have a large mass of people that could purchase these services, and at the start, they were very expensive. But there was the facility. There are still some bottlenecks. We should not say that that is completely solved, but the majority of African governments have created an enabling environment where investment has come in from the private sector into mobile telecommunications. And this has dramatically dropped the price. And there are African companies that are involved. You know, it's not just foreign companies that have come to invest in Africa. There are homegrown African companies that have been successful in the mobile space. And we need that to happen as well now in the rollout of broadband and achieving that last mile. And there has to be a counter-cyclical investment, because now we are in a depression. We will probably be seeing a recession. There is a huge impact on businesses around the continent, and perhaps counterintuitively, now is the time to invest. Now is the time to try and make sure that these companies are putting in that infrastructure, because it will help us grow back. Governments have a role to play in some cases in terms of the facilitation of that environment. Generally in the UN, we don't advocate tax concessions because it's difficult to claw them back. But it is important that the environment is enabling, that there is clarity, there is certainty. And this is where the AfCFTA really comes in. Because if an investor is going to put their money in, they need to know that that market is there and that market is going to grow. And that's really, I think, what the difference that the AfCFTA can make. But governments have to make sure that the regulatory side goes along. There are efforts at the continental level to deal with this regulatory aspect linked with the AfCFTA. And once this is in place, which we are confident as part of that same process, this will be possible. You will have companies that will say, well, I can invest in Nigeria, but I can cover the whole of Western Africa, or I can invest in Tunisia or Algeria and also cover North Africa, and have that connectivity in our continent really take place. And we understand, and when we look at internet prices today, in the majority of African countries, they are above the sort of 2% of income, which makes it's competing with other needs. It's competing with food, it's competing with shelter, it's competing with daily needs. And we need the internet to be a facilitator, something that contributes to the wealth creation and not in itself extracting wealth from African citizens. And I think we're close to that, but we do need that investment to take place. And of course, one of the other challenges which goes hand in hand is the investment in electricity infrastructure, because we have a lot of gaps there are almost 600 million Africans that still don't have access to electricity. And I think, I can't remember which of the panelists mentioned the example of Rwanda, that is matching their rollout of electricity and infrastructure with the rollout of digital fiber optic cable, for example, and infrastructure that can then allow the investment to happen and more citizens to have access to digital connectivity. Thanks, and back to you.
Thanks, John Paul. And such an important question, you know, in terms of creating that enabling environment. And maybe just to reflect on that point, I'm going to ask if Jessica and Nouha, if you can just maybe just answer the question around the high cost of internet access and low bandwidth on the continent often acts as a barrier, and you know, to many young entrepreneurs starting up, especially those looking to operate in technology or e-commerce. For businesses such as Clasher, what role do you believe the African Continental Free Trade Area can play in addressing this issue, and how should national entities leverage this agreement to speed up internet and make internet more accessible?
Yeah, thank you for that. So as we know, across the continent, we have massive bandwidth issues. Here in Nigeria, I could buy 50 GB, probably 10 GB the following day. And, you know, I probably have, you know, gone on LinkedIn, answered some emails and, you know, spoken to my team as well. So given that, you know, as young people trying to start businesses on the continent, it creates a barrier to entry for us. Not only is there a lack of ease of doing business in Africa as a whole, but the cost to start up, given the cost of data on the ground and given the lack of internet infrastructure, creates a massive barrier for young people wanting to start businesses. As we know, in Africa, we adopt technology faster than any other continent in the world, but governments, policies and processes that are put into place to actually create barriers for us to access the global economy through technology. And I think that's something that governments need to address if they want to encourage entrepreneurship amongst young people. As we know, 50% of the continent are under 30 years old, so it's going to be our young leaders now who are creating the next Amazons and Shopifys and Alibabas of Africa. However, if the government doesn't facilitate this, if they don't put in infrastructure in place to reduce the cost of data, slow down the speed especially, then, you know, we'll see our young people going to other continents and other places who give them the access they need to create companies and grow quickly cross-border across different continents as well. Nigeria right now is trying. They recently reduced the cost of data per gigabyte, which is a start, but you know, that doesn't spread to the rest of Africa. South Africa, Kenya, Egypt being the biggest economies in Africa alongside Nigeria need to also increase and adopt these different policies to ease the technology barriers that we're having today as young startup founders.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jessica, for that very elaborate answer. And now we will go to the question for Mr. Luke Kizitomuleka for the new attendees. He is the founder of Science Media Limited. Mr. Luke, are you still with us? Kindly switch on your video.
Yes, I am. I'm still with you.
Oh, all right, fantastic. My brother from Kenya. All right, so tell us, Mr. Luke, in your own opinion and expertise, although Africa is making incremental investment in building its digital infrastructure, most of these investments go to foreign-owned firms who provide consulting and engineering works. How, in your opinion, can Africa develop its human capacity to address the skills in building and maintaining its digital infrastructure? Please take over.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And it's actually what I'm following and what my colleagues are saying is very informative. What I want to understand, probably just to throw a spanner in the works and ask the following question. That during COVID, where we had, because when we were going through school, I know we were told that the basic needs are food, clothing, and housing. But we've realized that even to acquire the basic need as food and clothing now, you must have some connectivity or internet, because that was the driver and it was accelerated. So the question is, and as we are going forward, as governments in Africa, as the population or the youngsters in Africa, the youth, the people involved in the fourth revolution, which is actually the internet revolution, are we going to look at internet or digital space as just another item or a basic need? Because right now, assuming the way things are, because in Kenya we experience the second wave and we are going to have issues of, probably lockdown coming in and all that stuff, in which for you to get food, you had actually to use an Uber, or you have to order using Jumia, which was supposed to get food from a restaurant because you're not supposed to move out. So is internet still considered a luxury in the African context? Our government still considering internet as a luxury? What I believe in internet should be, or digital inclusion and accessibility should be recategorized and recalibrated to be a basic need. And actually, we should now be starting to talk about probably 5 basic needs now from what COVID has actually shown us. Now, back to your question. The people whereby the governments are rolling out and whoever is taking this space is actually the big boys from outside. Do we even believe that ourselves can actually do this? Does my friend Cedric, when he's going to present to the Central Bank of Cameroon, do they even trust him? They think that we don't believe in what we are doing as Africans. That is the problem that we are having. We believe that anything that comes from outside is more credible than what we do. But to realize that what happens is when technology is coming from outside, it's being imposed. So as African youth and African government, the policymakers in Africa, we should start believing in our youth. And this is what I've done. That I've told, what I normally tell the youth wherever I'm speaking is that we're going to do something until the African governments look for us. Because what has been happening is when we go to present to them whatever that we have, they start doubting even our capability. But let us, as the youth, the young people who are involved on this particular platform, do something until the government, that is what we are doing, that you do something in the space of disability. No one was ready to invest in it, even the simple thing as inclusion in terms of information. I went in there, and what the youth are doing in Africa, they are thinking that for you to do any business or for you to invest, you need a lot of money. Cedric will tell you, what you need, the most important thing is yourself, commitment. Then you need time, dedicate that time, be passionate, sleep and think about what you're doing. Roll out, they will come for you. But as long as we are not rolling out for them to come for us, they'll always believe that whatever we are producing is substandard. And as we continue being substandard, the flight of resources from our governments, from our budgets going outside is not helping the continent. Because if Cedric is able to get this money from Kenya, probably whatever is rolling out is coming from Kenya as a consultant, that money remains in Africa. If Nouha or Belaid is doing something and are actually being invested too by the government of Rwanda or the government of Cameroon, that money remains in Africa and it actually employs exponentially so many people. But we've left these resources in terms of our investment. The budgets, for example, how much money, if we do probably from analysis of our budgets, the total cumulative African budgets, how much of that money is flighted outside the continent for purposes of people thinking that we cannot offer solutions? Then when they came, people are coming in to do those same projects. We actually be the one who will be doing that job, but only being paid a meager. Had that money remained here, had African government trusted in the youth of this continent, then we'll be having a very, very credible, solid continent that is employing its own people. Otherwise, it will just be every day running on a treadmill and expecting African to grow. We are sweating a lot, but we're actually investing in outside, running on a treadmill in Africa and having a lot of conferences, a lot of talks, and it's not practical, it's not sustainable. So as I probably conclude, I just ask the African government the following question. What problems are they solving? What solutions do they have? What innovations? You'll find that all of them, and even if you look at the blueprints that they probably do, almost the same. What after some, And what I normally say that the differentiator is the business model. What business model is the African governments trying to implement? If the business model is that you'll get consultants from outside, you'll never make a move. If the business model is like China, what business model has China as a government? It has a business model. Let us invest in the Chinese companies and we'll make a move. So African governments should start investing in Africans, not as a favor, but as a business model. Let it be in the strategic plans of the government that we need to invest in the African youth, African solutions as a business model, not as a favor. Thank you very much.
All right, I was about to ask you to summarize. Since you're getting a lot of wonderful reviews from your presentations, I can see on the chat, people on the chat were with you, do not worry. Someone is saying this guy is so legit, Mr. Look for President. So thank you so much for that intervention, even if you did take up a lot of time, but it was worth it. And one thing I get from intervention is that we need to do something so that African governments can make internet a basic need, and it's up to you to take it upon ourselves. Thank you so much, Mr. Luke. Without further ado, now we go to Madame Anna Ekeledo, the Executive Director of AfriLabs. Madame Anna, are you with us on the call? Kindly switch on your video. Oh, perfect. All right. So you've heard from the panelists and what their contribution they had to give to us. Now, personally, from your experience as Executive Director AfriLabs, in what ways do you think that the development of trade facilitation hubs, where young people with intra-African business initiatives and ideas are incubated, will fast track the objectives of the Africa Free Continental Trade Area post-COVID-19? Please take up the flow.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Really good question. Well, I'll start by highlighting the importance of hubs first in supporting young people with businesses in Africa, right, in the broader context. So first off, most hubs on the continent provide creative and collaborative spaces for young innovators to build their ideas, build their businesses and scale, right? They also provide these collaborative spaces where the young innovators and startups can meet with other innovators, work with people with diverse skill sets, expertise, and other ecosystem players, like access to investors, access to corporate organizations that can, increase market access as well. Hubs also provide venture building, business development, and tech support to startup, mentorship, and as I mentioned, access to funding and markets. Now, how can these hubs act as trade facilitation hubs? Through community collaboration and via a robust network support system across Africa, right? Which links to other ecosystem players such as national governments, regional and Pan-African trade agencies, corporate organizations, academia, investors, development finance institutions, and of course, other hubs across the African continent. Now, for this network support system to be successful, right, it has to be backed by a very strong intra-African support model driven by technology, right? So basically, with the implementation of the CFTA post-COVID-19, what we'll see is more startups being incubated by hubs in one location, which has been happening over the past couple of years, actually over the past decade, but now we'll see more of it. A startup being incubated within a hub in one African location, being linked to hubs in other locations with a strong market expansion startup curriculum. With targeted mentorship, with access to funding opportunities specifically targeted as funding earmarked for businesses looking to scale intra-African. And then we'll also see hubs play a role of negotiating more foreign direct investment into viable, scalable African-funded businesses. As well, considering the phase 3 of the African Continental Free Trade Area is focused on e-commerce, basically the protocol on e-commerce. We're going to see more e-commerce businesses looking to take advantage of the trade incentives which result from the implementation of this phase 3 of the CFTA. Now, yes, sorry?
I think I kindly wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to round up and to do a call
subsea internet cables. How can this be addressed, Mr. Cedric? Please give us your opinion in as brief as possible because we're running out of time.
Okay, I don't believe in a centralized way to interconnect our cities. I believe that we should think of our cities as independent ecosystems. So we need to develop like solutions that could work in one city without the need to get connected to the others. Because the continent is so big, the challenge is so we cannot just think the way Europe is connected or China or America and do the same in Africa. Things are completely different. I mean, in payments, there is one key thing that we generally kind of forget on our continent. We are working with mobile money agents. For example, these agents are the backbone of the mobile money revolution on the continent. So all the mobile operators, M-Pesa in Kenya, Orange Money, Airtel Money, all of them work with mobile money agents. And generally, these agents are small entrepreneurs from the informal sector. And when you see them across the street, when you are a mobile money agent, it looks like your life is completely broken, and you're completely forgotten from the business ecosystem. And we work with them. And I want to tell you a small story. I met a woman in Yaoundé. She was just selling small good across the street. When I met her, she lost her husband, and she told me, I have kids, I don't know how to do, please help me. I gave her like $1,000, and she became a mobile money agent. And in 3 years, she grew her business so big that today she's driving a Mercedes. And these are the people who are building the backbone of our infrastructure. So we don't have to think, our revolution the way things are built in Europe. We should build our own revolution on the continent. Just like these mobile money agents, the app that we build, a mobile money app that helps them, generate more transactions, work more with more security, etc. And these are some of the things that we don't see in Europe. So in Europe, the people don't know about mobile money agents. And these are the people who are building the revolution on our continent. And we should focus on them. So same with the internet. For example, we've built our app. Our app works with no internet connection for mobile money agents. You go on the Play Store, you download Cash App, and it works with no internet connection, because we know that when you start getting out of big cities like Lagos, you go start going to, like in remote areas, there is no internet connection there. So these people will be left behind. So we should also think innovation with the core realities of our markets. So before building, I don't know, Zoom or whatever solution could work on the internet, etc., our innovators on the continent, guys, let's focus on building solutions that match our local reality. So with internet, without internet, we will build that revolution. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Awesome contribution, Mr. Cedric. And I can see some of the attendees are saying, Mr. Cedric is right, the solutions must be tailor-made. And someone else is saying, build our own revolution on the continent. We need to have a different environment. So clearly the attendees agree with your powerful deliberation, and keep it up. We cash up. Attendees you've had, we need to do things our own way for Africa to rise and for us to maximize the most opportunities out of this free trade area agreement. Now, last but not least, our last panelist for the day who will be answering our last question is none other than Madame Nouha Belaid. I love that name. And for the new attendees, she's the co-founder of Arab Journalism Observatory. Madame Nouha, do we still have you on the call? Kindly switch on your video.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm still with you.
Fantastic. I can see you loud.
And I have pleasure to talk to you as you had a problem connection.
But here we keep on striving until we get what we want. So your question, Madame, sometimes domestic regulations tend to slow down the pace of innovation. For instance, in some African countries, a license is required to fly a drone within a country's airspace, which is arguably for security reasons. Please tell us from your experience, how do you think African countries can align their digital policy and regulations with international best practices without compromising their national security to achieve the objectives of the Africa Free Continental Trade Area Agreement? In the briefest amount of time possible, please share with us what are your thoughts on this question.
Okay, it's a very important question and the most difficult one, I think, as we talk about an element, crucial element within the sovereignty of a country. To be brief, you know that the sovereignty of a country is an important element. So nobody, no country, no authority in the world should touch the sovereignty of the state. It's so crucial. But on the other hand, cooperations between countries is very important too. You know this. So maybe we must set up a mutual cooperation agreement to prevent a country from intervening in the sovereignty of another country. We can use drone, we encourage to use drone, we encourage to use technology because technology today is very important in our daily life, but also we have to respect other countries and respect if there is any partnership between countries. That's why I personally encourage any mutual cooperation agreement between countries in Africa or all over the world. And I think briefly that if the issue of airwaves in the past or aircraft, for example, without pilot was resolved at some point, so the issue of the drone could be resolved too in the same way, in the same government, in the same way. So governments will need only to establish cooperative partnership to make this cooperative more than to present a problem for another country. And in the same way, if we talked about African Union today, if we want to talk about Africa, so if we talk about African Union, so this is the role of the UA to contribute to make cooperations between countries to be able to be able to use drone in another country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And most importantly, for keeping it brief. Like you said, your question was the most complicated, but you managed to pull it off without a doubt. And I can see the attendees agree with you. One of them is saying, up to now, we learned the art of willingness, and we need the heart of change for all of this to work. I can see my time is up. Thank you so much, my dearest panelists. Despite the interruptions in connectivity, we managed to pull off a successful discussion. And the point I could get that cut across all of you is that the time is now. We need to make internet connectivity, digital inclusivity. We need to include people with disabilities. We need to look at how we can engage our renewable resources so that Africa's youth have more access to how we can use this Africa Free Continental Free Trade Area Agreement more effectively. That has been, it has been a very awesome session. Thank you so much, our panelists, Mr. Jean-Paul. Thank you so much, Miss Jessica from Clasher. Thank you so much. Mr. Luke Kizito from Science Media Limited. Thank you so much. Madam Anna, we appreciate you. Mr. Cedric, wonderful deliberation. And last of all, Madam Nouha, thank you so much for that awesome contribution. So without further ado, I think as moderator of panel 1, I'd like to call panel 1 to a close, and to let you know there are other awesome panels that are going to go throughout the day. Please stay tuned, and I would like to give back the floor to my awesome colleague and brother, Grant. There you go, Grant, take over the floor.
Thank you so much, my sister Sonia. I can see that you meant it when you said we strive, and I can see that with your strive, you have managed to conquer the internet connectivity problem. So thank you so much for that very informative session, and thank you to all the panelists. I think we certainly have gotten some rich food to think about and to ponder about, you know, and so we really appreciate the thoughts made there. Now, colleagues and participants, we are running slightly behind schedule. So our next session really is almost like just a bit of a break in the schedule, some fun, and I'm going to ask my colleagues if they can just come and take over the session. But what I will say is, unfortunately,